Abuse victims at Reddit. What made you realize that you were being abused? I'd say when my neighbors called the cops on my stepmom for locking me and my siblings out of the house in the middle of winter when I was a kid. When I was 9, my dad married a woman who had some serious ducking issues. At first she seemed nice, but once she moved and her true colors started to show, she would often tell my dad how we were misbehaving or something, or how we didn't listen to her. From there he would yell and scream at us even after us insisting she was lying. That just brought further issues. She would often make us do chores, not a huge issue, while she sat around doing nothing, and then would tell my dad how she had spent all day cleaning the house and how ungrateful the kids are because of her efforts cleaning the house. It was us who did it, not her, which brought wrath from my dad for not helping her clean the house. And to top it off, she would often force us outside in the middle of winter at like 9 in the morning for hours on end so she could have some peace and quiet, and often we wouldn't be allowed back inside because she would lock the doors. We weren't loud or anything, we would often be in our rooms. But no, she wanted peace and quiet, and due to growing up in a slightly poor family, we often wouldn't have proper winter clothes and would be huddled around the heater vent outside the house to stay warm. I never realized all this was abuse until my neighbors called the cops. Cops came, talked to my stepmom, and then my dad came home from work and they talked to him. Of course it somehow got spun to be the kid's fault. To my dad, she was incapable of being wrong. That's when it kinda clicked, and I remember talking to my grandma about it, and she straight up told us that might be child abuse. Hindsight, I was a little kid and had a literally evil stepmother. When we went to my biological's house for the weekend, we had the same meal every day: a Kraft single for breakfast, a Kraft single for lunch, and 1/2 of a can of spaghettis for dinner. We slept in sleeping bags on the enclosed back deck. When they went to the movies with my stepmother's children, either we had to ride in the trunk, my sister and I, so they wouldn't have to pay for us at the drive-in, or they would just padlock us in the playhouse shed while they were gone. And none of that even includes the sexual abuse by my stepmother and siblings. Every Monday they'd drop us off and voice their concerns to my mother about our being compulsive liars. This ensured they would think us talking about it was just wild stories. It wasn't until my new stepdad, a good but utterly terrifying man and a victim of abuse himself, started seeing the signs and got us out of there, that people started believing us. To this day I have severe trust issues, and my sister has repressed everything. If you bring it up around her, she goes pretty much catatonic until you change the subject, and she's still mean and hateful for the rest of the day. I went to a friend's house and realized that most families don't yell, throw things, threaten, manipulate, or make fun of their kids. Made a friend's house weird. I don't feel like something terrible is going to happen at any moment. That's odd. I've been telling stories for years about how cool my friends' dads all were growing up, and I never put together that they were probably just average, normal, understanding, nice guys until I read this comment. I always loved going to a friend's house when I was around 12 to 14. I need to say that this is not an abuse story, but still somewhat relevant to what you wrote. My mother was alone, worked in shifts, and us was 6 out of 7 days of the week not really there. I grew up at my grandparents', but my mother also lived there. It was just so nice visiting this friend with 3 siblings, a dad and a mom, and as stupid as I was that age, I hated my mother for it, for not being there for me when coming home from school, not being there when I had to go to bed, stuff like that. Today I know that she did it to earn enough money that I can continue going to the better school I was attending. Long story short, I idolized the family of my friend back then, and I only realized at age 19 that they are completely average people when his pretends got a divorce. The classical "we stay together until our kids are out of the house" family. Everyone is cooking with water in the end. That's something you learn while growing up. I had an heart-to-heart with my nephew around 2 years ago because he felt the same about his dad, the son of my mother's now husband. I call him my brother even though we share no parent, like I did about my mother back then. A lot of my realization came from reading and hearing about what child abuse looked like. I kinda knew my father was abusive from early on. It never seemed normal that he would shout at me a couple of hours at a time, take a break, and shout at me another 2 hours later in the day. Yes, I started timing it. It happened about once a week, plus ruining every meal. But it took decades to realize my mother was as well. In addition to enabling him, and the emotional stuff is what lives with you the rest of your life. The physical, which my parents didn't do, that was the X, is built on top of that. Scars heal, but the blame they threw on me that I was the one who made them treat me badly, that's still there. It warps your reality. Even if you know it's abuse, you are told that it's your fault. My ex is a pro at Darwing, or maybe I am just really susceptible to it. For years every encounter with him left me feeling like I was a crazy one, like I knew I wasn't in the wrong, but he would still manage to convince me I was. It really messed with my head and kept me in the relationship even after I knew it wasn't healthy anymore. Like I had just enough doubt that maybe I had some responsibility to change something. Then after I finally left, I watched as he created conflict with literally every important person in his life and destroyed those relationships one by one. The problem was never me. I feel that susceptibility to it every time, even if my mind was screaming at me that I was in the right. I trusted her because what if I am wrong? I ended up getting really good at denying myself and changing to avoid conflict without even really thinking about it. I feel like I knew inside that it wasn't healthy or okay, but I still stuck around way longer than I should have because I had convinced myself I wasn't a good judge of my own experiences. I feel like it comes down to being easier to just accept it's your fault even if it isn't, because that way at least you have the illusion of control over it. It took my best friend calling a ton of shit out and me reading other accounts of abuse victims for me to actually believe I was really being abused. I brushed off a million warning signs and red flags. I knew it wasn't right to be made to feel like a sex object. I knew it wasn't right to be constantly yelled at. I knew it wasn't right to have a partner repeatedly disregard the word no or my desire for any boundaries. I knew it was wrong of them to assault and rape me, even though I knew it was all awful. Though, I stayed for a while and tried to convince myself it wasn't that bad. It took a year to fully understand how serious and dangerous of a situation I was in. This may be cathartic to write, so here goes. I was abused as a child from ages 4-7-ish. It was done by a camp counselor called Coach Tom. I don't know his last name to this day. It mostly happened in the pool. He was teaching me how to swim. Each time, he would start with his hands on my hips teaching me how to kick, and work his way up to underneath my bathing suit, grabbing my junk and putting his fingers in me. He also called me pet names. I thought all of it was normal. Another thing to note is around this time in my life I was being diagnosed with a condition called rheumatoid arthritis, which affects the joints, primarily my knees, so I was physically unable to do a lot of the things the other kids my age were. He used this as an excuse to keep me with him for one-on-one time in the pool, even when all the other kids were doing other things. He's disabled, he would say. He needs more coaching. I thought he was right. I thought it was normal. Eventually, I think I became old enough at 6 or 7 to understand that what was happening to me was in fact not normal. So I went to my parents and told them that I was in too much pain with my condition and asked them to take me out of camp. They did. I didn't tell them what he did to me until a few years ago in my early 20s. I've since learned I was one of many victims, and yet I still don't know the guy's actual name. Still feel his presence next to me sometimes though, his voice in my ear telling me I am a special boy. I am doing mostly okay now. I've been in therapy for many years, worked through the trauma, but nothing will ever erase what happened to me. Meeting my husband and later my in-laws. They welcomed me right away and asked questions later. I wasn't treated like an outcast for being a city girl or neurodivergent. They actually wanted to hear what I had to say. They don't tease me and expect me to like it. They don't tease at all. Really, if they say something unintentionally hurtful, they apologize right away, with no excuses. They're literally the opposite of my original family. I don't remember the exact moment, and I still struggle to accept it to this day. However, my mom was abusive. She was manipulative and physically aggressive. She beat the shit out of me at least 3 times and would brag about it because it's how she kept us in line. She died when I was 15 from cancer, and it took a while for me to realize that being hit to the level I wasn't normal. So maybe college. The thing is, I know my mom loved me. She wasn't all bad and had a troubled childhood herself, but ultimately she was a bitch, and I am better off with her being dead. I didn't deserve to be woken up in the middle of the night and be beaten because I misbehaved for a babysitter. I didn't deserve listening to her brag about it to other family members. I didn't deserve any of it, and it's not normally behavior, at least to others. To me it was. As someone whose mom was abusive as well, that was one of the hardest things to reconcile, was the memories of the good times or even days. I have memories of her doing amazing caring things for me that doesn't cancel out the horrific days, and those are the days that mess you up. You're absolutely right. You didn't deserve deserve any of that. It's hard because my sister was the golden child and is way more sensitive emotionally. She has my mom on a pedestal and still misses her over 10 years later. It hurts me when I see her idolizing her. My dad is only one I can really be open about with how I feel in regards to my mom. She put him through heck. I am not his biological daughter, but he raised me from birth and my mom weaponized me. With all that being said though, I am 27 now and definitely in a much better position than my mom had ever been in. I miss her sometimes, but it's more the thought of her. I know she loved us in her own way. She just didn't know how to love. I always thought I was just in a really awful, secret relationship with an almost 30-year-old man when I was 15-16. One day many years later, a therapist asked me what happened to me when I was a kid. My crippling anxiety and paranoia didn't make sense with what I was telling her. I started talking. I told the police. He's been arrested. Thank you for sharing this. I went through something similar. I was in a 5-year relationship with a man who was in his 60s when I was 15 years old. It's crazy because I only truly realized how fucked up it was last year after watching BoJack Horseman. I realized I blocked out a lot of what happened to me. I still can't remember some of my teen years and I am not even sure I want to. You don't have to answer this if you feel uncomfortable, but how was he arrested? Did statute of limitations not apply? Also, how do you prove what happened so many years later? I am sorry for all the questions, but lately I've been thinking about going to the police possibly. I've never told anybody what happened to me, but I don't want this to happen to another girl. Oh wow, that sounds familiar. There is a lot I don't remember, and I hope I never do either. I am really sorry this happened to you. I can't imagine going through that for 5 years. I live in Canada and there is no statute of limitations on sex crimes. I have no proof, just what I told the cops, and they did a lot of witness interviews, so whatever the witnesses said must have helped. First, you need to go to a sexual assault center. They can tell you the statute of limitations and prepare you for going to the police. I prepared for months and it still wasn't enough. If you need anything else, please DM me. Be strong. When my father threw me through the China hutch, it was kind of obvious that I was being physically abused. My mother, on the other hand, I didn't realize she was emotionally abusive until I was in a school health class, and in the course of discussing relationships they discussed emotionally abusive people and the signs, and I realized that my mother fit like 90% of them. How are you doing now? I'll answer out of order. Yeah, I am good now. That was as a kid, and in my early teens my folks got divorced and I pieced the duck out to live with my friend's family instead of either of them. She had a lot of depression issues and would say things like how if it weren't for the kids she could kill herself, or if I did something bad she would threaten to tell my father. She would also make me feel guilty for being happy or feeling good if anyone else heard wasn't happy. Consequently, I base a lot of my own happiness on whether or not I can keep the people around me happy, something I am still working on. A therapist. Honestly, I didn't fully realize until about 2 years after the fact. I assumed what happened to me was how all teenage relationships work. I don't remember exactly what made me realize, but I do know that it just hit me one day that he had ignored all of my no's and done what he wanted anyway. He caused me pain, physical and emotional. Looking back on it now, there were dozens of red flags, but for whatever reason I didn't notice them at the time. It didn't hit me until a few months after I finally walked away ETA for the last time. I was able to be seen and heard and cared for by a man without having to contort to fit his needs, that I could rely on someone else for safety and protection, to feel comfortable closing my eyes while I lay next to him and not be ashamed of my emotions or feelings, that I could mess up and not be scrutinized or punished by the person who loved me, to not flinch or cringe when I was touched by him, to not have to keep secrets anymore from him, from my family, friends, myself. Hey, how did you finally get away safely? Thankfully we didn't live together, but I got a job in a different state that was close to my family. I didn't tell him much about it and kept it pretty quiet. It was 5 hours from the town we lived in. I never gave him my new address and he didn't seem too eager to get it. He didn't want to leave his party life and friends behind and said he'd come visit and make a LD thing work. I prayed he wouldn't. He never did, and I slowly started ghosting him out of my life and tried to make him hate me. I publicly found out about him sleeping around with other women and was able to use that as my get out of jail free card. I knew if I just ended it out of nowhere it wouldn't end well. He tried hard to get me back, but I was strong enough and far enough away that I could tell him no and mean it. My relationship with him was over 3 years long and we were never engaged nor married. He was very emotionally abusive, a drunk with no money, and had major daddy issues. He was pretty fragile and I was afraid to stir the pot. I was lucky in that I had a new degree, funds to move, and family and friends supported getting out. It wasn't easy but so worth it. I thought I was just in a relationship with an angry person, someone who got frustrated with small things and couldn't control his temper. Little things would set him off. He would slam things, throw things, dent furniture and the drywall, drive erratically, close off and sell for an entire day, etc. Occasionally he would snap at me or yell, but he never laid a finger on me, so I didn't think it was abuse. Since I lived with him, I often walked on eggshells and suffered from anxiety. I was jumpy, I slept poorly, and startled at sudden movements and loud noises. Gradually, I stopped raising little issues, let most things go his way, took over more and more of the household chores, etc., all out of fear of setting him off. It didn't click for me that this was not an anger management issue but an abuse issue until I finally confessed what I was struggling with to a mutual, longtime friend, and he was so shocked. He'd known my ex for ages as a laid-back, easygoing person. And then it occurred to me my ex didn't flip out around strangers. He didn't flip out at work. He didn't flip out with friends. He didn't flip out when we were with his family or mine. He could absolutely control his anger. He just didn't around me. And once I realized that, my hope that he could become better by working through anger management or therapy died and his behavior became impossible to tolerate. For anyone else going through this hugely confusing and upsetting experience, I highly recommend the book What Does He Do That by Lundy Bancroft. It's not a preachy book. It doesn't even once tell you to leave. It just helps you make sense of things, organize your thought process, and gain some clarity and perspective into the situation and make whatever decision is best for you. Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing for more videos.